One of the things that we will use every day in algebra is we will use graphs. And the technical name for a graph that has two axes is the Cartesian coordinate system. So I will either use the words Cartesian coordinate system or Cartesian plane. Either way, it's the same thing. So we'll look at this Cartesian plane. I'm sure you've worked with them before. It's just a normal graph. Okay, and so what that means is we have a x-axis. Your x-axis is always going to run left to right. It's the horizontal axis, okay, like your horizon. And then we have your y-axis. It's going up and down. I'm going to tell you right now, you need to memorize which is your x-axis and which is your y-axis. Otherwise, you will not be able to make it in this class. It's very, very important. On your calculator, it's labeled. On some of the graphs on your worksheet, it's labeled, but you need to know without even thinking about it which axis is which. So if you need to memorize that, if you don't already know it, put a big star next to it because it's super important. After that, we have, because of those two axes, we have 4 quadrants. It splits up our graph into 4 places. We call those quadrants because there's 4 of them. And the first quadrant is right here, quadrant 1. Okay, it's always quadrant 1. And what quadrant 1 means is that all of your values are going to be positive and positive. Your x's and your y's, if you have points, are going to be positive. That's because this is 0, and your numbers get bigger this way. And then this is also 0 on your y-axis, and your numbers get bigger this way. So all of your numbers are positive, positive. Okay? Then we start going counterclockwise. So we're going to go this way. And quadrant 2 is this one. Helps if I spell it right. Quadrant 2. And this means that our x's are going to be negative, and our y's are going to be positive. Anything in this quadrant, your x's are going to be below 0, but your y's are going to be above 0. So an example of this would be, for instance, -5, +2. Okay? And your next quadrant, still going in order, is going to be quadrant 3. And that's going to be, we're going to have negatives and negatives for your x's and your y's. Okay? Because all of our x's are below 0 and all of our y's are below 0. So an example of that is going to be, let's say, -2, -1. Okay? And then finally we have the 4th quadrant, quadrant 4. Our values here are going to be, the x's are going to be positive and the y's are going to be negative. So an example of that would be +3, -2. Okay? What we have in the middle, I think I wrote quadrant 3 on the wrong line. What we have in the middle, right here, is always our starting point. That's where you start counting. Okay? So that's going to be 0, 0. And there's a technical name for that, and that is called the origin. Okay? Origin means where you start from. That's where we're going to start. It's where you start counting. It's the most important part on the graph because that's where you go to every time. So you need to have that word memorized because I'm going to say the word origin a lot throughout the year. And it's very important you know what we mean. Okay, moving on. This first blank is going to be Cartesian coordinate system, or plane. I'm going to put Cartesian plane. So the Cartesian plane is used to graph relationships between quantities. Okay? That is something that's very important for you to understand. If it's on a graph, there is a relationship. Okay? It shows that they're related somehow. If the two things are not related, they can't be put on a graph. So it shows relationships. And it's composed of two numbers, two number lines, called the x and the y-axis. And they divide that plane into 4 quadrants like we talked about. Okay? The next blanks are going to be point or ordered pair. Okay, those are the same thing. I will use them interchangeably. It means the same thing. So, a point or ordered pair is written as inside parentheses x comma y. Okay, that's very important. You need to make sure that you know that. Put a big circle around it. That is something that you have to memorize. Your x always comes first no matter what. So when you see points inside parentheses, you automatically know that that first number is your x and that second number is your y. If you need to label them every time, that's fine. I don't care, but you have to know that that first one is your x and the second one is your y. Okay? And they're going to be located in any quadrant or on the x-axis or the y-axis. Okay? After that, the next blank is relations. So relations can be graphed as a point or a set of points. Okay? So looking at those ordered pairs that are given to us right here, we need to decide where they are, where they're going to be located. You can do that in 2 different ways. You can draw yourself a little graph and graph them and see which quadrant is it going to be in. Or you can look back up at the notes that we took that tell you the positive and negatives for each one. Okay, either way, whatever works for you. So that first one is negative 2, 3. So I need which quadrant is going to be a negative for my x and a positive for my y. Well, right here, I have negative for my x, positive for my y. So that's going to be in quadrant 2. Okay? The other way to do that is to sketch yourself a little graph. Draw yourself a little picture. If I was going to look and see where negative 2 was, if this is 0, 0, negative on your x-axis means you have to go to the left. So there's negative 1, there's negative 2, and then your y's would be up 3. So 1, 2, 3. So I need my point to be at negative 2, 3. So that's going to be in quadrant 2. Okay? So draw yourself a picture if you get confused, if you can't think about it, and figure it out, or look back at your notes. The picture will never lead you wrong. Okay? 0, 0 is going to be our origin, always. It's not in a quadrant. If it's on an axis or on the origin, it's not in a quadrant. You tell me what axis it's on. Okay? So we have the origin. Then for this third one, we have a positive and a negative. So positive 2, here's 1, here's 2, and then negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just deciding which quadrant it is in. That's going to be, if this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, that's quadrant 4. And then we have 0, 3. If the point 0, 3, 0 is my x, that means I don't move anywhere on my x-axis. So I'm right here in the middle. And then positive 3 means I'm going to move up on my y-axis. So that's 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be right here. So I'm on my y-axis. So I'm not in a quadrant. We just need to write y-axis. Okay? Let's look at a few more vocabulary words. Okay? The domain, that's what this blank is, domain, D-O-M-A-I-N, of the relationship is the set of permissible x values. That's the part that you need to memorize. Domain equals x every time. We will be using that for the rest of the year, so that's very important. Okay, domain x. That's all I care about you knowing. Domain x. Okay, we're going to skip this stuff in the middle and come back to it. Domain is x. Well, that means that our range is our y. Okay, range equals y. And we'll go further into detail about what that means, but I just want you getting those words in your head right now that you already know what they mean. Domain is x, range is y. Okay? The way I remember that is x comes first in the alphabet, right? We have x, y, z. X comes first, and then D comes first. Y comes second. Range comes further back in the alphabet than domain. So if that helps you, if you can come up with another way to figure that out, that's up to you, but you need to memorize it. Okay? Going back up into the middle here, we have two words that were on your vocabulary list. The first one is discrete. Okay? The most important, there's a lot of words in there. The most important part that I want you to get, individual data points not connected. Okay? This is going to be a scatter plot. We'll talk about those in a couple of days. So if you're, nothing else, underline those two parts. Individual points not connected. Okay? The opposite of discrete is continuous. This is a word that we use in English all the time, so that you should know what continuous means. Continuous means it doesn't stop. Okay? So continuous means they are connected. Okay? It's going to be a solid line on a graph. So, for instance, a discrete graph, let me draw axes real quick. A discrete graph is going to be where you have separate data points. We use this when we don't know the numbers in between. Okay, that's important. Or if you can't measure what's in between. For example, a discrete graph is if I was counting people. Okay, if I was counting people, and this is one person, two people, three people, I can't count half a person, right? I don't know what half a person would be. You can't cut somebody in half. So I can't get the information for 2.5. I don't know what it is because I can't cut somebody in half. So if you can't get smaller than a whole number, it's going to be a discrete graph, is one reason we use discrete. Okay, a continuous graph is when you have, let me put that in a different color so we don't get confused with our axes. Continuous graph is when you have that straight line. Now I can have data points on that line, but they're connected. Okay? And what that means is I know what all the numbers on that line are. If I needed to figure it out, I could find, even though I have a data point here and a data point here, I could figure out what the actual number is right here. Okay? That's what a continuous graph tells us. That's why we use them. We will use both all year, and you need to be able to recognize which kind is discrete, which kind is continuous, and why.